right, I'm back with Bill Noguera. We're going to talk about something that's been in the news, obviously, lately, and that is Lyle and Erik Menendez. And Bill has I think, a pretty unique take on it. Not a unique take, but I guess you can shed some light on it because there's some similarities between his case and the Menendez.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
So I will turn it over to Bill and let him explain, and we'll talk about the case. I'm not sure at the end of this whether we're going to agree or not. But that's not the purpose of this. I want to hear your side of it, and of course, I'll give my side. So go ahead, Bill.
Well, thank you. It's been a while since we've done one of these, and I appreciate that you have me on. Yeah, the Lyle and Erik Menendez case is a very interesting case, and it caught my attention when it first happened because there are similarities, and the similarities are very obvious. Not at first, but once you get into both cases, which is the case that I have served 42 years in prison for, and their case. So, Lyle and Erik Menendez, obviously brothers, they grew up in a very privileged neighborhood. Their father was the president of Hertz, the rental car manufacturer or company, if you want to call it, that O.J. Simpson actually was the spokesperson for many years. They moved from the East Coast and, of course, came to Los Angeles. And just to give you a perspective of the type of influence and money their father had, they lived in a house that, from what I understand, Elton John used to live in. And there's discrepancies of whether Michael Jackson or Prince lived in the house as well. But you can imagine the magnitude of this mansion. It was 9,000 square feet or something. It's just something that you and I could probably fit both of our houses in, our cars and everything else. So these guys grew up from the outside, a very privileged home life. Both boys were ranked tennis players. Their father became one of the head guys at RCA Records, and from there he signed a number of huge acts like the Eurythmics. If people remember, if you're old enough, you remember the Eurythmics and a number of these other bands. And one of the boy bands that was a big hit in the 80s and 90s was Menudo. Their father signed them. So their background is very interesting. Looks like they're a privileged family. The father, millionaire, obviously. They're of Cuban descent. And life looks really great from the outside. Suddenly, without provocation from anybody can see, their parents are murdered. Both the father and the mother. And at first, police believe it's a gangland shooting. They believe that their father, because he had ties to the porn industry, as well as RCA Records and a number of other shady, possible characters that were involved in organized crime, investigation was initially pointed at organized crime. The crime scene was horrible. You have both Kitty and the mother and the father, Jose, in the living room when they were watching TV with something to the effect of 13 to 15 shotgun blasts to the face and body. One crime scene detective said that the shooting was so horrendous that he could not tell between the father and the mother. They were so destroyed. That in itself made me pause when I first heard that. And this is 1989 when we first heard about this case, and I paused. I remember where I was at. I was on death row when the case came up, and I heard the recording, because this got a national spotlight from the very beginning. And that caught my attention. Gangland shootings, a person who's there to get in and get out, and you're a detective, you would know this, they're professionals. They come in, they take care of it, they get out. They don't try to make more noise. They don't try to draw attention. In this case, it looked very amateur to me. Shotguns don't have 15 shots, even if you use 2 of them. pump shotguns carry 5 shells. The one in the chamber is 6, I believe. At least it was back then. So to have that many shots means the perpetrator or perpetrators reloaded and then came back in. That was a problem for me. And usually assassins don't carry shotguns. They also don't carry shells in their pockets. So I figured they went outside to reload or went somewhere to reload. That, to me, looks like something very personal. And it also looks like instead of using an instrument like a knife to stab 72 times when you're passionate, they used the other tool, which was a shotgun. They kept blasting because they wanted to destroy the 2 people completely. So, of course, that's the end of it. We don't hear anything else until months later when the psychologist both boys were seeing was having an affair with another woman, and that woman somehow got a hold of recordings, recorded the conversation between her and the doctor, and it became known that both Lyle and Erik talked about killing their parents. And that really led to them being arrested. And I'll stop there just to kind of talk to you about it. Am I on the same page with you so far?
Yeah, I mean, so far, I was going to ask you where you were when you heard about this, if you had already been on death row, and you already answered that you were. But other than that, yeah, I mean, I'm on the same page with you. The only discrepancy, I guess, or disagreement I would have so far is, and I get this all the time, to me, and I understand where you're coming from here, but you cannot tell if something is passionate or if it's personal by the number of stab wounds. Now, with this shotgun situation, I will take a step back a little bit on that, because 2 shots of buckshot is going to, or slugs will do the trick. 15 and you have to reload. Yeah, I would look at that and say, well, this isn't just a stranger. But you can't say that 100%, because like you said, if they're amateurs and they don't know that 2 or 1 shot's going to kill somebody, maybe they will unload and then reload and finish the job. So I'm not big on overkill, and I'm not big on the number of stab wounds or shots indicate that something is personal.
Correct, and I agree 100% with you on that. But the reason I focused on that is because law enforcement said it's organized crime. And organized crime usually have guys that have been in crime for a number of years. People in organized crime don't just tell some kid off the street to come do something. They usually hire someone that's a thug who's done this before, or at least had experience with some type of gun. So shotguns immediately caught my attention. Amateurs. Not that it was...
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Just that it was amateur.
Right.
And, hold on. Hold on one second, please.
Yep.
They're calling me. Oh, okay, I'm back. They're just calling me to work change, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. But so that caught my attention. Not that it told me anything, but that it seemed like overkill. And I'll make the point in similarity to my case. So the confrontation I had with the person that I killed, there was, at the end when they investigated, there was a lot of damage done to the person. Physical damage, it was a beating. And it was behind rage. Whether it was to focus at that person or in other cases like serial killers, they kill and they stab 30, 40 times. It is a rage. It may not be personal to that person, but it can be personal to that type of person or that gender. In my case, it was a personal situation. That's why I related it that, okay, this is something that's just not professional or it's cut and dry. There seems to be something other than what is seen here. And that's all I thought. There was nothing else that I thought. I didn't think of anything until later, of course, Lyle was arrested, and then Erik turned himself in a few hours later, a couple days later, when he found out his brother was arrested.
Right, okay.
So the situation has a lot of twists, and now we're looking at it because there's politicians involved, and of course, when politicians get involved, the truth gets twisted a little bit. So both boys are put on trial, and from the very beginning, their position is, my father was molesting me, my mother facilitated it, and that's why we did this.
Okay, Bill, but let me stop you there. That was their position when it came to trial, correct? That wasn't brought out
Correct.
with the psychiatrist, or it was never brought out when they confessed to the psychiatrist as to why they did it. That they were not. It was not mentioned until trial that they were sexually abused.
Correct.
Okay.
It was the defense's first position at trial that it was done because they were molested. And then during the first trial, the judge allowed cameras in this. And this is, by the way, right in the middle of that whole O.J. Simpson thing. It's a huge thing going on. So cameras in the courtroom were a big thing. And the judge allowed that defense strategy to be presented, that they were molested, and this is why they did it. They had two juries for Lyle. One jury for Lyle, one jury for Erik, and they were tried. The jury was deadlocked at the end. They could not decide. So that told me, well, okay, they're deadlocked. And then the judge leaves chambers while the whole mistrial is being done, and they decide to try him again. This time, a new judge decides something different. He doesn't find merit behind the abuse, sexual abuse that was happening, according to them, allegedly in the household, and there's only one jury, and the case proceeds. Obviously, they were found guilty of first-degree murder with a special circumstance of multiple murder and financial gain, because during those 6 months that they were out, or 8 months that they were out, before they were arrested, they spent in excess of $700,000.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
They bought custom Jeeps, Porsches, Rolexes, took lavish vacations to Aruba and other tropical places. So, the DA's position is pretty firm. Look, they did this for money. These guys don't seem like they're grieving anything. They're just basically having a good time. They are spoiled kids, and this is exactly what they've done. They killed their parents for the money. Let me call you back.
Yep.
Hotel link.
Hey, Ken, I'm back.
Okay, go ahead and continue with your thoughts on Erik and Lyle.
So, of course, when that defense was put forward, I had kind of a moment where I started thinking about, okay, so what is the likelihood that these kids could come up with this defense theory, a very sophisticated one at that? And I thought, well, they have great attorneys. These attorneys are extremely experienced, and it's plausible that something like this could happen. But this is before all this sexual abuse has come on the news in the last 20 years. This is something that was unheard of basically back then. And the other part that bothered me was that both of these boys are Cuban descent. So for two boys, males, especially Hispanic, to admit that their father was sexually molested them, and then Lyle testified that at one point he molested his brother, it struck me like, wow, that would be a lot for especially a Hispanic kid to admit this stuff when there is such a toxicity of male testosterone in Hispanic families. The father is the head of the family. He makes all the decisions. He trains his boys to be that same type of guy. That father, Jose Menendez was a dominant male. He took over situations. He ran companies. He's a millionaire. So it's very difficult for me to see how two boys would make up this story when they would go to the heart of their egos. That bothered me. It made me think that it might be true. And then there was other things that bothered me. There was, you and I have discussed this, but it really didn't. It really didn't. galvanized with me because these kids, why would a father have photographs? And again, when I was watching this case, they said the father had these photographs of the boys naked. Now, they didn't give a lot of details to what were the circumstances, but I remember my father in any situation where it could be perceived that I had any weakness or whatever, naked being one of them, would he ever have those photographs? He would destroy them or whatever, because he was very conscious about the male ego and how it's cultivated in Hispanic culture.
Yeah, and
so
that's what. No, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bill, but I wanted to ask this before I forgot. I mean, as you were talking there, I was saying to myself, well, is there any similarities between Jose Menendez and how he brought up his boys as with your father? Because I remember reading your book and obviously corresponding with you for the past 3 years or so. I thought that there was. Am I correct in that?
That there was similarity, absolutely, and that's why I speak with such authority about it. My father was the same type of man, except that he wasn't sexually abused. He was physically dominating, and he physically abused me because he would punch me if I did something wrong, or he would grab me by the neck. But for him,
this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
The whole male-dominated, testosterone-driven thing, and so, yeah, I recognize it, and that's why it didn't fit for me. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not completely true. It could be true that their father, this was all made up, that they made this thing up. But there was little things that really hit home for me, and it was the similarities between their father and my father. Of course, my father was never a millionaire, but the personalities
in the same culture background.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, and I want to get to whether you believe that there was sexual abuse in that house, because one of the things that I will say, and I've always said this as 15 years as detective and law enforcement, is you never know what goes on behind closed doors. Now, I will say that, and I will say that with confidence. But that doesn't mean that they were being sexually abused.
You are correct. You and I would never know what really happened. We have now a perception of what happened in the house because the only surviving people are Lyle and Erik. The father and the mother, they can't speak, and we can't speak for them. So I look at consistencies. I look for irregularities in what they say. Their story has been a certain story. They've stuck to it, which is not very difficult to do. But assuming that they were abused, and when I say about consistency in behavior is we have a letter that has surfaced recently that Erik wrote to a cousin, and the only reason it came to light was because the cousin died, and his estate was being reviewed, and they found this letter from Erik, where he is talking about the abuse sexual abuse his father is, demanding of him or inflicting upon him. That a boy of 18 years of age, he was 17 then when he wrote the letter, to write this to a cousin in just already forethought of what they're going to do in the future 6 months, it seems a little unlikely to me. And then we have the kid from the boy band, Menudo, who has filed with the Los Angeles Police Department a complaint that the father did X, Y, and Z to him and molested him as well. So I've always been one of those guys, a skeptic when it comes to people 20, 30 years later begin to say, well, that person did this something to me. And the justices have a number behind it, a financial number. So that is a problem for me. But there seems to be a consistency going on there. And this suit or this complaint was filed before the Menendez boys were in the news. And the reason they became relevant in the news again was because of that complaint that boy signed and placed in the Los Angeles Police Department's lap about this case. So those are all things that bother me. In my opinion, there was sexual abuse in the house. The signs are there. You have one son losing hair very prematurely. You have another boy, Erik, before the crimes happened, before the murders happened, went on a burglary spree. He's acting out. Why? It could be any reasons, but again, it adds to the consistency of the story that trauma is happening in that house or in their lives, and they're acting out because of it. They're called, they're factors, cumulative factors that happen, and then there's triggers that go along the way, that they're external triggers and internal triggers. Usually internal triggers are things like, the feelings, the pain, the hurt. The external triggers are wetting your bed, acting out and doing crimes, petty crimes to try and take control of your life in a way. And I see these consistencies and these behavioral patterns in both of the boys.
Well, couldn't they have acted out and did these burglaries because they're just bad people and they're spoiled brats?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that is the crutch of all this thing. We're sitting here trying to decipher, and we have all this information with politicians and DAs trying to get attention. So what is the truth? Yeah, it's hard to really say exactly what the truth is. So then I look at behavior after the crime. We have this spending spree. That bothers me a lot. They get arrested, they go to prison, and this is an insight that no one else could give anybody on a podcast or anything. It is that I know people that did time with them, where they were at. They were separated till 2018. There was a reason for that, and it's because of Lyle's testimony that he molested his brother at one point. That was California Department of Corrections' decision. I respect it. But along the way, both boys got into a lot of trouble in prison. They got caught fighting. They got caught with drugs. They got caught with cell phones. They got caught with a lot of different things as recent as a few years ago. And I know they're painting this picture right now. These guys are perfect guys, that they facilitated numerous groups. And they have. And you have to commend them for that. At the end of the day, they did do 35 years in prison. Whether that's enough time or not is up to authorities or something beyond my pay grade. But they are being painted as perfect model prisoners, and I can tell you they were not.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
I've even interviewed a number of people in the California Department of Corrections, both officers as well as convicts that have been doing time with them. And they told me right off, these guys, they're dirty. They've done a bunch of things. They got caught with this, they got caught with that. And their record, if I think it's public record, if you can get them to release those records, you'll see that they had a lot of write-ups. 128, 115 serious write-ups for fighting, drug use, drug possession, as well as cell phones.
Well, that's not unusual. I would guess at an early age of maturity and being in the prison. Would you agree with that? Because I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, when you first got there, I would guess maybe the first 5 to 10 years that you were there, you probably had some similar dust-ups with fighting and breaking the rules of some sort. And then with age comes maybe a little bit of wisdom where you don't do that anymore.
Absolutely correct. You're right on point as usual. Yes, my first 5 years in jail where my conduct was horrendous. I had a lot of fights, a lot of misconduct, a lot of issues with authority, and, well, my conduct changed when I got to San Quentin. I changed my perspective, my code. I reevaluated myself. But, of course, in 1993, after being incarcerated for 10 years, I had a physical altercation because someone tried to assault me. Of course, he looked like he got hit by a diesel truck, but once someone, and that's one thing I couldn't do back then, once someone turned me on, meaning assaulted me or did something, I didn't have an off button. I just kept going. That's something that I've been able to control, to evaluate, and now I have tools to deal with anger and all these other issues that could, in some ways, make me relapse. But What I'm talking about happened only a couple of years ago with the Menendez boys.
Right.
This wasn't 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 35 years ago. This is in the last 5 to 6 years. They're already in their 50s and late 40s. That shows me, and look, no one can say that they're perfect, because I had a write-up in 2019 where I was caught with a Bluetooth device. It's a little thing you put in your ear. So, sure, I admit that was mine. I made a mistake. I made a decision based on that my father was dying, and I wanted to hopefully speak to him before he died, and I couldn't call him because he didn't remember who I was. It was a bad choice and a bad decision. Since then, I've taken a number of different classes to understand why I did that, and the issue has come up again. A number of times guys have offered me, hey, we can give you, I said, no, thank you.
Right.
So, yeah, you keep progressing, but you don't get caught with drugs, fights, drugs again, dealing drugs, cell phone, and it continues on. It's a pattern of behavior that would suggest to anybody, especially in the California Department of Corrections, this is one of the reasons that they do not want to go to a parole board. And so this leads us to this part, which is, well, I haven't spoken to you about this on the show or anything, but I've said from the very beginning, and you and I have talked about this, that I never did this for financial gain. There was a confrontation. I lost my temper, and I took a person's life because my own selfish reasons. I take full responsibility. The issue I've always had, it was done for financial gain. About a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, a Superior Court judge reviewed my case again, looked at the special circumstances, and struck them as not true. His reasoning was a pattern of behavior, as well as
You have 60 seconds remaining.
the issue that the person that testified against me, which said he overheard a conversation where I talked about insurance money, admitted that he lied about everything. That Sergeant Calvary Kirtner pushed him to say it, and he at that time would say anything to get out of jail, and that's exactly what he did. The judge found that to be true and struck the specials, gave me 25 years to life, which made me immediately eligible for parole, which I will be going to a parole hearing in January, where if they find me suitable, I will be released. Lyle and Erik actually do not want that to happen, and I'll cover that next.
Okay.
Hey, Ken, I'm back.
Okay, so you're saying what don't Erik and Lyle want?
Okay, so they're in front of a Superior Court judge now under habeas corpus. Habeas corpus is a document that they filed with new evidence. The new evidence was the letter that Erik wrote 6 months before that, and the lawsuit and complaint that the boyfriend Menendez filed against the father, that he actually raped and molested him. That the decision by the judge will be thus: that the evidence is significant enough, and there is a reasonable legal probability that if that evidence was introduced at trial, there is a reasonable probability that a decision more favorable to the defendants would have occurred. That's what he's considering right now. If the answer is yes, then the Superior Court judge would then move for a new trial. However, the DA in LA County has already said, look, we want these guys to get manslaughter, they should get out, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, the DA in LA County is 30 points behind. This is a major case. It gets his name front and center, and he has gone on every program talking about this issue. But however, the judge has the power to strike the special circumstance and lower their sentence to, they have life without possibility of parole. He could lower it to life with possibility of parole. Because both Lyle and Erik were youth offenders, meaning they're under the age of 26 when this happened. They then would immediately be eligible for parole, because under the statute in California, it's 1308. Any person under the age of 26 is considered a youth offender, and after the controlling offense is maxed out, which would be 25 years to life, so 25-year point, they would be eligible for parole. The reason that Lyle and Erik do not want to go before a parole board, because that parole board doesn't have political interests. They'll be looking at the prison record and asking them, Why were you caught with a cell phone? Why were you caught with this? All those conducts, the fighting, the drug use, the drug thing, will be used against them. And the parole board has the right to deny them parole. How they do it is to say you're unsuitable for parole. Come back in 3, 5, 10, or 15 years. They can keep doing this till they're 1,000 years old. A good example is Charles Manson. He had 7 years to life. He never got out of prison. He died at the age of 80 plus years because the parole board found that he was not accountable for what he did. He lacked insight. He lacked remorse, regret, shame. These are all the hallmarks of a person who's remorseful for what they've done. And then, of course, there's prison conduct. They don't want to go before the parole board because if they get denied, it's a 3-year wait minimum.
Well,
and it keeps going from there.
What do they want?
They want the governor of California to step in and give them clemency before this judge acts. If the governor of California gives them clemency, they walk there with no parole, no any kind of probation, parole, or anything. They just walk out. 3 men, time served. That is something that the parole board would. If you get out with a 25-year to life sentence, you're on parole for a minimum of 3 years. In that time span, if you commit any kind of crime, you come to prison for life. End of story. And to get out, you have to go before a parole board, and they have to find you suitable again.
Right.
Believe me, if the Menendez boys got into trouble again and they can't in prison, there's not a parole board in the world that'll let them out.
Right. Well, what do you think's going to happen?
I don't think that the governor is going to act. I think that because of all the pressure the DA's office is putting on the Superior Court judge, that he probably will grant them a new trial, at which time the DA's office will not want to proceed with prosecution. So then he would ask the judge to rule and give him a lesser sentence, which he's already done. He's already made his position very clear. So it's going to, if the judge finds there be enough evidence for new trial, there'll be a motion by the DA's office, an official motion, to go ahead and have the case reassessed by the judge, and the judge then would sentence them. And there's a lot of legal mumbo jumbo that could happen that the DA he could then, because once the judge rules that a new trial is warranted, the DA has the ability to lift charges because they're no longer convicted. So he can choose not to go after them and just go after them for manslaughter. So a lot of things that can happen. Unfortunately for the Menendez boys, November 6th is the election day. Gascon, who is the LADA, will lose his position because the guy running against them, the person running against them, will win. So he has a very short window to January 6th, I believe, or January 5th, to make all this happen. If it doesn't, the new DA can immediately say, we have re-amended, we've changed our position, we are actually prosecuting this case, and it changes everything. So that's why you see this huge push by the defense and the DA right now to get this changed before that election. Because once that happens, the new DA steps in.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
He can change everything immediately, and it would be go bad for the boys because half of that office, the DA's office, believes they should stay in prison. The other half believes they should be set free.
Right. Well, and if I'm reading into what your words, I would say that you're open to them not being sexually assaulted, but you lean towards that they were sexually assaulted. And I am the opposite of that. I believe that it's very possible they could have been sexually assaulted, but I lean towards that they weren't. And I want to ask you a couple of questions, and I think I know the answers to them, but I want to get your thoughts on it regarding that. If sexual assault was happening in that house, why? And he had confessed, Erik did, to the psychologist that they did this. Why didn't he say the reason why? Why did they wait until trial to put forth that defense?
Yeah, very good question. Well, sometimes, as I mentioned before, that's a very personal thing. It goes to the heart of being a male Hispanic guy and the things that have been bred into their heads. That could be one reason. It's like, actually very private. There's a reason why sometimes women who suffer sexual assault don't say anything. but their conduct they become promiscuous. They do a lot of different things, and you wonder, how does that happen? Why does a person who has... Give me 1 second.
Yep.
Yeah, give me a few minutes. I'm talking to my lawyer. Okay, can I cancel it? They're trying to get me to go to radiology because I ripped my finger, but I'm going to cancel it and finish. This is more important to me right now.
All right.
So there's a lot of different people respond to different things differently.
Sure.
And we've seen this, and you as a detective... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. I agree.
Yeah, you as a detective have seen people that commit a crime, or they experience a loss, and they break down, they cry. Other people are very stoic. They don't do anything. Different people act differently because of their psychology and because of how they were brought up. I don't know. I don't have the short answer. I don't know why Lyle or Erik did not tell the psychologist what they were going through. Maybe they were getting the burden off themselves. It was very traumatic for them to obviously kill their parents. But in that same sense, something that Erik said that caught my attention because I felt the same way. And again, this is something that no one else has talked about because I actually have gone through it. He said that once he turned himself in and he was arrested, it was a huge burden. And he felt that for the first time in several months, he could sleep completely. He slept like a baby. He didn't... There was no more burden of keeping this a secret. There's no more hiding it. Because it takes a great deal of energy to hide and to continue with this lie that he was telling that he was the one that actually killed his parents. For me, it was very similar. When I was arrested, I was in a downward spiral. I had, committed this crime, and it was virtually killing me inside. I did a lot of things. I started stealing cars at an incredible rate. I wasn't doing the things I had done before, which was to calculate marks, take them, deliver them. I was just going out, and it was a way of me almost self-suicide. I began using drugs. I would go to competitions of martial art competitions, which predates the MMA by about 20 years. And I would go to Mexico and fight, and I would allow people to beat me for the first few rounds, and then I would explode and then virtually knock them out. But I felt like I needed to be punished, and that used to keep me up. It was a lot of emotional things, and when I was arrested, I slept for nearly 20 plus hours straight. And when I woke up, I felt almost like the secret was no longer a secret, that I could rest now.
Right.
And that's hard to explain, but he said that, and it struck home for me.
No, I get it.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
But one could also very well say that they didn't say that it was sexual assault to the psychologist, because all it is a defense, and it's brought up by the defense because they have to justify what they did, much like OJ. The evidence was overwhelming with OJ. He did it, so you have to come up with a defense. Well, the police planted it. That's going to be the defense. It wasn't us. So to me, there's a correlation between the two cases in a way. Hey, they're both guilty. They did it, both the Menendez and OJ, and we have to come up with a defense. So why not say, because Leslie Abramson used that defense prior to that to get a guy off that had killed his dad, I believe, to say, hey, he was sexually assaulting him. So it's not a far stretch to think that she would use that defense in the Menendez case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where you and I have that middle ground where, look, both are plausible, but we lean a certain way.
Right.
And I have my biases. We have to remember that the case that I was convicted of, and what I did when I was 18 years old was, something similar. Of course, I didn't kill my parents, but there was a parent, the girl I was with, and her parents, and there was sexual assault there. And this is way before Menendez came up with this. This was something we had put in the paperwork and we had filed with. Actually, we have photographs to prove my point, and that's part of the reason the judge ruled in my favor, of course, 42 years later. remember we spoke about this when you and I first started speaking, and I said, Ken, you asked me about this, and I said, look, I hate to give explanations because it almost seems like I'm making excuses. And I don't make excuses for my actions. I take full responsibility for what I did. It was my own selfish and destructive nature that caused this to happen. I am only to blame. No one else, no other outside circumstances. And I stick to that. But the reason I've brought all these things up is because this case was similar. And there were similarities. And I wanted to kind of like give insight into what they could be thinking. Of course, at the end of the day, these guys are not serial killers. They're not what I do best, which is profile serial killers and sexual perpetrators. This situation is a bit different. So I'm lending almost like an expert voice because I went through something very similar and I understand the case. But whether it's true or not, I mean, you and I could probably debate this for the next 45 years, and I'm sure the news is going to for the next 45 years, depending on their perspective.
Right. And one of the things that I think that I lean towards is, yes, I think something was going on in that house, and I will rely on your explanation of how many shots there were, and shots to the face and everything, a rage type of shooting. Yeah, I will buy that. But I think maybe it's because of what has been proven, and that is that Jose Menendez was a physically domineering type of person. And that has been proven. I don't think it's ever been proven that he sexually assaulted anybody. But it's been proven that he was very hard.
You have 60 seconds remaining
on those kids. And maybe that is why all this got set into motion.
Yeah, completely accurate. Yeah, it's very true. No one has ever proven that he did because there's no DNA, there's no photographs of it, none of those things. It's the word of Erik and Lyle. And, of course, this whole, media spin and all these different TV shows that have come out about it. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. It could have been the bottom line, and some of the actions by the boys suggest that. The spending spree, $700,000 in 1989 was equivalency of, $2 million now they spent in 6 months? That's an incredible amount of money. Let me call you back.
Yep.